Good morning, YouTube. Today we're going to be installing a new product on the Prius. So we got some new top hats from Tiedemanns. I'm going to show you guys those in a second. Just to give you an update on what's going on with the car, I actually had these spires up on the front with the 195 35s. Now one of the issues that I had was that I was running too much camber, I think. This is my daily, so I was running about -10 in the front. I ended up actually bending one of the barrels on these wheels. So what I had was I swapped it to the rear since I'm running a wider tire in the rear. Once I got that on, I was able to seal up the leaks, and then we got some fresh 195s on the front. So we're looking to put those back on, but we're going to pull some camber out of the front. So I'm thinking about going from like -10 to -8. Here are the Tiedemann top hats. Special thank you to Henry for not only bringing these to the States from Japan, but also he shipped them from California to Hawaii for me. So thank you for that, Henry. Now these are the Tiedemann SP25 Pro top hats. Now as you can see, these are super thick. So the reason they did this, based on what I can tell, is that the strut tower, the ring for the inner strut tower, kind of intersects with this portion. So with most top hat designs, you won't be able to move this all the way inwards for the maximum camber. So it looks like they cut this down deeper so that the top of the coilover or the strut is not going to interfere with the strut tower at all. And basically that's going to prevent you from having to cut the strut tower in order to max these top hats out. Now I believe these go a little bit further negative than the Low Life Projects top hats that I have on right now. So we're going to do a side-by-side comparison once I get those off the car. And then with this, we should be able to take the camber bolts out because we're going to be getting the camber we need from this, and then we'll be able to go back to the OEM non-camber bolts. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So I get asked all the time, how do I measure camber when I'm working on these cars and aligning them? So my answer is pretty simple. If you have iOS, Apple iPhone, all you got to do is open the Measure app, and there is a protractor level built into the app. Now for the wheel, I usually put like a plate over it. I got the toe plate on it right now, but that basically just gives you a flat surface to put this up against, and then you can see how much camber you're running. So I mean, when I use this angle, it says -11, -12, no, -11. Yep, so basically the only thing you need to make sure when you're doing this is that if you're rocking some sort of phone case or something, make sure that it's actually sitting flat against the plate and there's no like buttons or anything interfering with it while you're measuring it. So for those of you that don't know, we're going to have to take apart this entire cowl assembly in order to even access the coilovers. The top hats are way down there underneath all this stuff. So basically we're gonna prep this car to be worked on. We're gonna break the lug nuts loose on the wheels, take off the bumper so it can be jacked up, take all that apart. So I'm gonna do that and then I'll be back after all that's ready. Alright, so we're about ready to jack the car up now. But here you can see the Low Life Projects top hats. So these are currently all the way maxed inwards. Luckily I did not have to cut the strut tower in order to get those all the way in. But I'm thinking with the new ones, they might be able to go a little bit in, and then we won't have to cut it because of the thick bevel design that they use for the Tiedemann ones. We now have the car jacked up. Jack stands underneath the crash beam. So before we go to take this coilover off, one of the things I recommend doing is actually breaking the coilover loose before you take it off, if you already know that you're going to have to adjust the height. Now I know that I'm going to have to adjust the height because the new top hat design is actually super thick, much thicker than the one that's on there right now. So I know that as soon as I put that new top hat on, it's going to raise the height a little bit. So I'm going to want to lower the car a little bit to compensate for that. Now in order to break this loose, I've talked about it in my other videos before, but I like to use a adjustable spanner wrench. These are a lot beefier, a lot stronger than the spanners that they actually include with the coilovers. So if you ever have a problem breaking loose stubborn coilovers, you might just need to upgrade your tools a little bit. And then we're going to be using a cheater pipe on the handle, and then this is just the upper portion of the handle for my jack. So that's what we're using on the spanner wrench for more leverage. We now have our collar loose, so we're going to go in and take out the two camber bolts that are holding this in. We're going to take out the nuts for the top hat, and then we're going to go ahead and drop this coilover out. Here is what the camber bolts look like versus the OEM bolts that we're going to be putting back in. So this lobe here is what gives us the camber, and then these are just straight bolts. We are going to put one bolt in here temporarily just to hold the coilover in place for the knuckle. So that when we go to unbolt it from the top, the coilover doesn't just fall down and fall on top of our axle and break it. I almost forgot, but make sure you take out the 12mm bolt that holds in the bracket for the ABS line and the brake line. Here is the coilover out of the car. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take down the preload for this spring so it makes the top assembly easier to take apart. We're going to zip that nut off with a impact gun, install our new top hat, reset the preload, and then it should be ready to go back in. Here's a quick side-by-side comparison of the top hats with the pillow ball removed. So this shows that the T-demand does in fact go a little bit more negative as well as positive if you care about that than the Low Life Projects top hat. And then here is a side-by-side profile just to show the different thicknesses. So remember, it looks like T-demand made this one a little bit thicker so that they could have this center portion recessed, and then that would allow the inside to go in further without interfering with the strut tower. So pretty cool design, pretty cool engineering. I'm honestly pretty impressed. It's not something I would have thought of, but yeah. Alright, now reassembling is very easy. We have our centering fitting here that's going to go on. This is right on top of the radial bearing. Then we have the pillow ball itself. You can also put this on with the top hat still on it. I just have it off. And then you have our centering nut that's going to go on here. This is all going to get tightened down with an impact gun, and then we'll be able to set up the top hat to the settings that we want it and then put it back on the car. Alright, you guys probably already knew this, but of course we maxed this John out. You're going to tighten these Allen bolts to 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds depending on the torque wrench that you're using. And then this is what it looks like installed. Super thick, but what we're going to do now is restore the preload on this spring, and then after that we'll be able to put it back on the car. Here is the coilover installed in the strut tower, and look at that clearance. So yeah, definitely this design is pretty next level. Allows you to go even further negative without cutting the strut tower. So cool stuff. Alright, as we're going to put the car back together, it is worth noting one thing. So even though these stock bolts do not really allow for camber adjustment because they're just linear bolts, it is worth noting that on this coilover, Broadway actually cut this top hole into an oval. So with that being said, you can actually adjust the bolt position within the oval to adjust the camber ever so slightly. So you just need to make sure that before you torque this bolt down, you're conscious of the position within this oval, so that you can get both sides to match. The lower hole is just a regular circle, so the upper hole is the only thing that we're going to be worried about. So the top hat 14mm nuts, I torqued those to 25 foot-pounds. And then I showed this concept in my camber bolts video, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to jack up this assembly so that we lock this knuckle fully inwards before we torque these bolts down. That way we know the exact positioning of the knuckle when we tighten everything down. I think the torque spec for these is like 175 foot-pounds. It's something crazy, but I usually just do like 100 or 150. Honestly, it'll be okay. These bolts are freaking huge though. 22mm. Alright, so we got this side completely in. We're gonna have to adjust the height later. But I just want to touch on these V1 RCAs from T-Demand. So there's actually a few more companies that make cheaper alternatives to T-Demand, but they have a similar design. So we have Low Life Projects, 326 power, which Nathan found out that the parts they advertise for the ZVW50, which is the 4th gen Prius, will actually fit right here on the 3rd gen Prius as well, the ZVW30. Now, when you're running the extended one from the lower control arm, what that does is stretch the axle out a little bit. So it's important that you run a top hat design that moves the strut sufficiently inwards to balance the stress that's being put on the axle so that it's not hyperextended. Now, if you don't think you're going to be running that much camber and you're not going to have a top hat that's really maxed out, you want to look into something like the Tiedemann V2 RCA. So instead of going out, that RCA only goes upwards to kind of improve the axle angle. So just keep that in mind. These axles are really sensitive on these cars, more sensitive than the Subaru from my experience. So you need to really make sure that you balance it out. Don't run the V1 extension version unless you're running a top hat, and don't run a top hat like this unless you're running the V1 extension. Also, if you are running the extended RCA, you will also probably have to pick up a set of extended tie rods as well. So make sure you keep that all in mind. Make sure you go through your checklist and find out what you want to do, what parts you want to get, and make sure that you have all the supporting parts for it as well. Alright, so the install for the top hats was pretty fast, but the adjustments are taking forever. I think I just about got it, so just fixed the alignment a little bit. It was towed out, and then we're just dialing in the ride height right now. We might lower the front like another 1/4 inch or so. But other than that, we're done. So here is the spires back on with the 25mm spacer. There's the barrel clearance. It should be alright. Took a little bit out, so we'll see. And yeah, that's it.